With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Samach Daled Daf Soid. We're going to go back to the Mishnah on Daf Samach Beis. The Mishnah spoke about one after designating both Se'idim and making the Goydel, thus determining which one is Lashem and which one is Lazazel. If one of the two Se'idim, one of the two he-goats died, so firstly, our Mishnah is of the opinion you can't just take another one he-goat to replace the one that died. You can't do that. You have to take another pair, and you have to make another goydel. Now, one of them will be replaced, but the other one, you will actually end up with two of the same. So the Mishnah writes that one should be brought, Lashem, La'azazel, and the Vahasheni, right, Yira Ache Yistoiv, you should allow to go to pasture, and then ultimately, when you redeem it, you're going to use its money to buy a carbon, Nedava, a Kates, Hamizbeach. And when we learned the Mishnah, we already spoke out that what is not clear is which one is actually used and which one is the Sheni. Is it the Sheni from the first group, from the original pair, or is it the Sheni from the new pair? And as we will learn today, that is a machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. What will be underlying the machlokes is whether we say Balechayim Nidachin or Ein Balechayim Nidachin. We'll speak this out as we learn the daf. There's a principle of rejected or rejection. When something is rejected for a specific reason, what happens when the reason is removed? Does that item that was rejected now go back to its original status, or do we say sometimes Kiven Shenitcha Nitcha? We will see when Lukula Alma, we say Kiven Shenitcha Nitcha, at least between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to chazer what we learned yesterday from Chonan HaMitzri. But when Balechayim are the ones that were rejected, here we have the machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. That's going to be a big part of today's daf. And then on Daf Samach Daled Amud Beis, we'll have another very important topic. And this is as follows. Every now and then we come back to the halacha l'Moshe Messinai that there are 5 chatois shemesos. B'chlal, a carbon that's already imbued with kedushas haguf. If for whatever reason that carbon may not be brought, the general rule is taka, you can't redeem it right away. You have to wait until it gets blemished. You never are allowed to make a blemish biyadayim, so yira ache yistoiv. But there is a solution of ultimately redeeming it and using its value for a oilas nedava. However, by chatois, and there are 5 cases, we'll just focus on one today. Halacha l'Moshe Messinai. One of them, of the 5, is a chatos that got lost. So a person inadvertently ate chaylev, which was a very common reason for which one brought a carbon chatos, because chaylev looks very similar to shuman. People would eat chaylev by mistake today. You don't find them in the supermarket, so people don't violate that. At least we hope we don't have them in the supermarkets. A person became aware of it, and they designated a chatos. Before they brought the chatos, what happens if that animal got lost? Got lost. So the person didn't want to kratz until they find it. They designated a new one. Now, there are many nuances of what happens now. One of the cases that we'll focus on today is that the original chatos was found before either of them were brought. So chatos number 1 was lost. You designated chatos number 2. You found chatos number 1. Now, we'll speak it out more pratim. There's a machlokes Rebbe in the Chachamim, which is gavaldik. L'kula alma, if you bring the second one, even though the first one was available, so you end up with the one that was taka lost, well, that's the halacha l'Moshe Messinai, that the chatos that is lost is left to die. But what happens if you bring the first one? So appreciate what happens. If you bring the original one, the second one was never lost. So here we taka have a machlokes tanoim, Rebbe and the Chachamim, whether we apply the halacha l'Moshe Messinai of chatos she'avda is left to die, or maybe over here yira ache yistav, and ultimately use the funds for an adava. And we'll see how this machlokes will be very much negeya to our machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, whether we say balachayim nidachim or ein balachayim nidachim. And Chevra, let's dive right in. It's in quantity a relatively shorter daf, which will allow us to learn it ruyig, and hopefully we will better understand today's sugya. So we left off 5 lines from the top of the Amid. right? By the two dots, we are referring back im shel shein meis zesha Allah olav v'chulei chevretz kedai again. We don't have to rush today to go back to the Mishnah on Daf Samach Beis. Let's read the words in the Mishnah inside. Okay, so the Mishnah is on Daf Samach Beis. The Mishnah spoke about one of the two he-goats dying. Right away, the Mishnah says that there is a difference whether it died before the goydel versus after the goydel. We are learning today sugya in the scenario where it died after the goydel, right? It's in the beginning of the line, ve'im mishahigral meis. Step number one, I'm reading the Mishnah, yavi zug acher v'yagrer aleim batchila. You got to make a new goydel. Now, the Yoma im shel shein meis zesha Allah olav agoydel lashem yiskaim tachtov, because that's the only one. But now you have two seirim that are designated noch by the goydel la'azazel. And we got a problem, which one to use and which one not to use. Ve'im shel azazel meis zesha olav agoydel la'azazel yiskaim tachtov. But now you have two seirim that were designated lashem. One of them will be offered as a korban, and one of them will not. And all the Mishnah says is, V'hasheni yira ache yistov yashakoyach. The second one. Now, which one is the second one? So let's just focus on one case. It's going to be the same in both cases. All right? The one that was la'azazel died. So when you make a new goydel, you only have now one la'azazel. So there's no question. That's the one you're going to send. The two lashem, one is brought, v'hasheni yira ache yistov. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav, that which one is the sheni? Sheni shebezug rishon yikrav. All right, the second one of the original pair is offered. And by the way, we're going to have a little bit of a repeat what we had just 2 daf ago about mitzvah barishain. In other words, you have two karbanos, both of them, one the goydel, there was zoicha begoydel lashem. You bring the first one, and sheni shebezug sheni is the one that's yira. So the word sheni means from the second zug. However, Rabbi Yechanan Amar, that sheni shebezug sheni yira. The new one should be the one that's yira. I'm sorry, sheni shebezug rishon yira. The second of the first group is yira. How can you call it sheni? It's from the original group. It's the original group, but it's the second animal of the original group. And sheni shebazuk sheni, only the new one from the new group, that is the one that's yikrav. Achloikis Rav and Rabbi Yechanan, and the Gemara explains that b'mai kom mifligi, what is the nekuda of their machlokes? What is underlying their machlokes? So Rav Savar, says the Gemara, balei chayim einon nidachin, that living beings are not going to become permanently rejected. Nitcha means rejected. And Chevra, make no mistake, that for you to be allowed to offer any one of the two he-goats, the other one has to exist. So during the time that one of them died, whichever one it was, the living one may not be used, i.e., it's rejected. It's nitcha. Now, question is, could it become reused? Does that state of rejection permanently stay, or can you remove the state of rejection? Rav holds that balei chayim that are rejected will never become permanently rejected. Now, what is Rav implying by balei chayim? So let's quickly chop what we learned yesterday regarding Chanan HaMitzri. You know what, let's read Rashi. We learned yesterday noch a bigger shita, but let's read inside Rashi, beginning 5 lines from the top of the Amid. Rav holds that einon lidachin, meaning that im iro lahem shas psul, if there was a moment when they became disqualified, adayin yochaylim lihistaken, it can still be rectified. When kishi is daveg loy acher. Again, you can never bring either one of the seirim if there isn't their counterpart. Everyone needs a counterpart. When one died prior to getting the new zug, none of them have a counterpart. They for sure may not be used. No one is debating that. But now that you got the new zug, Rav holds, now it's reinstated. And v'lo yomrin hoyel v'nitcha yitcha. You know why? Because it's alive. In contrast, here at Rashi, avol b'shchutin, which by the way was a case in the Mishnah. So if one of them was slaughtered, which is the one lashem, and after you shechted the one lashem, meis hamishtaleach, And now you're going to take a new peer, and you're going to end up with a new soid hamishtaleyach. Oh, here Rav is going to agree that yishafei chadam, because since it was the dam that was nitcha, hoil v'nitcha nitcha. Rashi is really just telling us to reach the chab. What did we learn yesterday? The das yochid of Chanan HaMitzri. Chanan HaMitzri, even according to the maskon of the Gemara yesterday, that holds you always have to make a new geidel, not like the Tana Rab Shimon, but the dam itself is reinstated. What's Chanan HaMitzri is the unique opinion. Nothing is permanently rejected. Rav doesn't hold to that. Rav holds once the animal is dead, kivin shenitcha nitcha. But if it's alive, then it can be reinstated. I know we are a few daf ahead of the cycle, but yesterday, right, Chav Vav Sivan, we had the Moeredik Hayom Yom, right, that the Yardu Chaim Sha'oila, it Lamal Yusa, that even when someone is in the Sha'oil, if they're Chaim, they can do tshuva. Amalep, there's no such a thing on a Balachayim that you're permanently rejected. That's Shitas Rav. However, Rabbi Yechanan Savar, no, that just like we learned in Rashi, even Larav, once it's not alive, once something is rejected, it's out. Even by Balachayim, there is the concept of permanently rejection. So you can't learn Pshat in the Mishnah, Vahasheni, referring to the second one of the first pair, which is going to be brought. No, the first one, since when the Mishtaleach died, the one Lashem was not allowed to be used, you got a new pair, you have to use the Lashem from the second pair. Elamad, the one from the first pair, Yira Ache Yistov. And by the way, we appreciate Yira Ache Yistov is Takanat L'Kula Alma. That's another machlokes we had in the Mishnah, because the Rebbe Yehuda holds that the halacha l'Moshe Messinai, that achatos, in our case, the replaced minchatos is left to die, isn't only by a carbon yachid, l'shitas Rabbi Yehuda, it's even by a carbon sibur. So remember, so Rabbi Yehuda holds that the one that won't be used is going to be left to die. The Tanakam of the Mishnah doesn't hold that. Holds that halacha l'Moshe Messinai is only by a yachid. Here we're speaking about a carbon sibur, pseider. Yira Ache Yistov. At least you can rectify it by using its value, but the animal itself, Rabbi Yechanan holds, even though it's a balachayim, kivin shenitcha nitcha. That's the machlokes. This is a very important machlokes, and here the Gemara is going to find us the sources for the machlokes. My tama is not logic. My tama is, what's the source of Shitas Rav? Says the Gemara, the Yalef mimechusar zman. The initial proof. I know you're going to jump on this. Mechusar zman. What's a mechusar zman? We just learned this. It says in Parshas Emor that every animal that's born for 7 days it should be with its mother, and only from the 8th day and on yeratze lekarben ishal Hashem. So you have an animal that's born. It's not ro'ui to be a carbon. Any animal. So you can say it's nitche. But when it becomes 8 days old, from now on, you can designate it as a carbon. So that's the original svar of the Gemara. That was the raya for Rav. Any mechusar zman. Mechusar zman, lav afal gav da hashta loichazi. Today meaning even on the 7th day. If it's not yet 8 days old, it's not chazi. Nevertheless, ki hoder mechazei shaper dami. But when it becomes fit, because it turned 8 days or older, now you can bring it. Ayat was nitcha. No. It was taka nitcha then, but not anymore. So hachinami, any other psul, even while the moment of the psul, taka, it was nitcha, but if you resolve that, like in our case, you found a zivik, you found a shidduch for the one the mishtaleach died, you replaced the mishtaleach, so then Rav holds the first one should be brought. The Gemara is going to ask later, though the first one could be brought, why dafka the first one? Even if you hold that balachayim einam nedachim, so you should have the option to choose which one you want. We'll get to that soon. But first, he's proving that it's not permanently rejected. Hachinami loishna, to which the Gemara right away counters, midami. You can't bring a raya from a chusar zman, because there's a huge difference between something that was never fit from the outset. If something was never fit, it was never rejected. That's the beauty. It was never fit. You were never included to be excluded. Right? The Rosh always used to say, you're not that great to make yourself small. When people used to use by the Rosh, Lefia Nias Dati, he got very upset at that. He says, you're not that big to have to say that Lefia Nias Dati. In other words, if you are included and then you are rejected, that's a much worser thing. If you were never, you're not called Nitcha. You were never invited to begin with. Hassan leis chazek klal. But over here, where, again, you have to have two se'irim for either one of them to be valid and one of them died, just the case we're focusing on. It's all going to be the same in the opposite. Is the mishtaleach died? So the lashem was fit. Now that the mishtaleach died, the lashem is not fit. So that means it was first nira and then it became nitcha. Maybe kiven shenitcha nitcha. So you cannot bring a raya from a mechusar zman. And indeed, Rav never said that. The Gemara was thinking this is the reason. Elo hainu tamad Rav. That's a gewaldige proof. The yalef mi balmum oiver. And that's clear. And by the way, that's also in Parshas Emoid. All of the mumim of an animal, while the animal has what the Torah defines a blemish, it may never be used for a carbon. Now there's a balmum kavua, and that animal has to be sold gewaldik because it has a balmum. Now you can take a sell it, and the money will go whatever the dinim are in every carbon. But when you have a balmum that's not kavua, balmum oiver, a temporary blemish, while the blemish is on the animal, it's not fit. And here we're speaking about an animal that you were magdashit before it had the balmum oiver. It was nida, it became nitcha, and we will see from the pasuk that when the blemish goes away, it will be brought. That's takaraya. That's balachayim, that ain't balachayim nidachim. Balmum oiver, lav, afal, gav, deloy, chazi, hashta, yet, ki hader mechazei, when it becomes fit, because whatever the mum was, the mum went away, shaper dami, so hachanami loishna. And by the way, everyone will subscribe to that. The only question will be, is this din unique to Balmum, or can we learn from Balmum? But before we go into that, the Gemara says it's emes, but how do we know that? For Hassan minalan, and that's based on psukim. And that pasuk, again, it's in Parshas Emor. It says, Ki mashchasam bahem, because their corruption, their hashchasa, is in them, bohem, we were speaking about a blemish, mum bam, the blemish is in them. That's the pasuk. Now the pasuk does not explicitly speak about a permanent blemish, a temporary blemish, but when the Torah speaks about blemishes, it's like a double lashon. You can't bring it, ki mashchasam bohem mum bam, is medayik, mum bam hu de lo yiratzu. This is all about ice. When the mum is in them, taka, you can't bring it. Which implies that avar muman, once the blemish goes away, then yeiratzu. Nira, v'nitcha, and nachamol, v'nira. Rabbi Yechanan is moida. However, says Rabbi Yechanan, that is unique to a balmum. Why? Because like we just mentioned, the Torah didn't stam say mumbam. Could have said after enumerating, clarifying what are the mumim, mumbam. No, it says mashchasam bohem mumbam as a double lashon. So the bohem, bohem is to tell you, heim who, only in this topic of balimumim do we say the chiyuv and muman, then yeiratzu. Ha kol dechoyin, but all of the other halachic rejections, indeed we say, even by a balachayim, hoyel v'nitchu, nitchu. Once they are rejected, they are rejected. And that's learned, yes?
We're supposed to have a pair, right? We talked about that they're bought together, they're bought together, they look the same, and they're valued the same. So what if just basic logic dictate that you should go with the pair, which is like the version of the new animal, not the old one?
I would say the opposite. I would say the one that was designated first, if it could be used, should be used. Mitzvah borishan. I get it that you're not allowed to bring it while it doesn't have a pair, but you resolve that. You got a pair. You had to bring a whole nother zug, but you replaced the one that died. You can argue either way.
But I'm saying the remaining one, or whatever.
Yeah, the lashem in our case, the remaining from the original pair.
Its match is the new animal, not the original one.
So what? But at least this one was from the original pair.
I understand, but we're taught that each group of animals needs to be brought in a pair. It has its twin, its corresponding, closest value, and it looks alike. So how do you know that?
The Gabbai Rishon remains the Gabbai Rishon even if everyone else drops out and they were replaced. It doesn't work that way. I'm telling you, the logic is you're in. Only if there's a halacha that doesn't allow you to go in. Okay, let's go weiter. Now, the Rav says the word bohem is to teach you another din. Not to tell you that Balimumim are unique. What's the din? Gavaldik din. That be'einayu hu deloi merzu? Only if the balmum are there by themselves, we'll explain what that means, then is when you may not bring a balmum. But in the case that there is a taroives, there is a mixture, and even though when we normally apply the halachos of mixtures, one would have come out l'chumra, will come out l'kula. Now 1 second, it's not what's taroives, and it's not all the cases, it's a very limited case. I'll speak this out by heart, that's a Mishnah in Zevachim, it's good to chazer this. If someone shechted an animal, we're speaking about a korban oila, l'mashal, and after the animal was already dismembered, as you remember, by the oila, we even learned over here about the Talmud is a korban oila, and all of the limbs are brought out on the mizbeach, we chapped that the animal was blemished. So that's it. Once you realize now the animal was blemished, wherever you're up to, stop, because a balmum may not be brought. The problem is that the Beis HaMikdash was a busy place, not a problem, that's a great thing. And don't think that they shechted one animal and they dismembered one animal and they brought up one animal. Sometimes there were thousands of animals. So many kohanim are working together. What happens if there is a pile of limbs and we know that one animal was blemished? Now we don't know which limb came from which animal. No, it's a din of taruvas today we used in the kitchen. This is a din in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, normally you'll have to be machmer. Without getting into all the pratim, when we do say bittul, in the case where you have to be machmer, what would happen if, for example, someone said, no, the head of Chaim Yankel's animal had a blemish, halachic blemish, the ear was missing. And it's in the pile, but they realized that one head from the pile was already brought. Are we allowed to say, which is a big kula, the one that was brought was the one that was blemished? It was already brought. So at least, I know the legs I can't bring, because the legs, some of the legs are from the balamum, but maybe all of the other heads should be brought up. And we taka say that, according to some tanoim, that's a big leniency, that if there's a mixture, and one was brought, and only afterwards, we're speaking about everything was done kedasu kedin, you only discovered that an animal was blemished after some of them were brought up, some of the pieces. And again, there's only one head, or there are two forearms. He says that there was a blemish in the forearms. There was one set of forearms that were brought up, or it was on the right forearm. One right forearm was brought up. Are we allowed to say that the one that was brought up was the one that was blemished? It's done already. So let's bring up all the other forearms. And that is what we learn, according to that from Bahem, only when you know there is a blemish. The moment you are able to be toila, that the invalidated one was already brought, which is not a good thing, but at least let the remaining ones be brought to be mater de taruvas. We are mater de taruvas. And that's keditran. Let's read it inside. That evadim temimim. Evadim is a korban oila, because from the other korbanos, only the pedarim are brought. The same thing can be in the pedarim, by the way, by the chaylev. So there are different chaylev parts. And you discovered at a certain point that one animal had a blemish, which means the chaylev of that animal cannot be brought. And they were mixed up with baram balmumim. So kaidam kol, we have to be machbar. None of them can be brought up. But comes along Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer the Shamuti, the Beishamai, the Machmer, he's Mekel. He says that im karav haroi shel echad mehem. If we know at this point, there was a blemish in the head, and one head was already brought up, not be'isur. They only chap that one of the animals were blemished after a head was brought up. That detail is important. We're not consigning anyone. Everything was done properly. Rabbi Eliezer holds we can be toila that the one that was brought was the blemished one, which means all of the remaining heads are okay. Again, you can't bring up the other animal parts because you don't know, maybe the animal part came from the blemished one. But the heads, there was only one head blemished. So the Yikrivu call her Russian kulam. At least bring up all the other heads. Same thing. If kira'av shel echad mehem, if they already brought up the legs of one animal, and we are able to be toiler and say, maybe that was from the blemished one. So we already did what should not have been done. It was already done. At least let's do everything now. All of the remaining legs are from the tamimim. Yakrivo kol hakaroim kulam, and that is the din that they learn from Bohem. You have to know for sure that there's a yeah.
If they brought up all the heads, are those not going to be replaced? Like they're good now?
So let's chazer good. That's good. And the answer is, Danny, even if none of the limbs are brought up, there was a ritzui. Because the kapara comes from the zrikas adam, and again, even if none of the evadim and pedarim are brought, b'di'evet, the carbon affected its function. Elamah, it's a mitzvah to bring it up. So you do it if you could, if you are allowed. Now the chachamim don't agree to that. The chachamim oimrim that afilu karvu kulam chutz mi echad mehem fakert. Here we have to be very machmir. We have to presume maybe the one that's here was the balamum, and therefore the dinim of a balamum is that yetzei lebeis hasreifa, with all of the pratim you learned in Zvachim. There was a beis hasreifa in the Azara, there was a beis hasreifa in Yerushalayim. The carbon type, if it's a carbon that has to be eaten in the Azara, so then if it's possible it has to be burnt in the beis hasreifa in the Azara. If it's a carbon type kacham kalam that could be eaten bedin beheter in Yerushalayim, then the beis hasreifa was in Yerushalayim, it has to get burnt. Okay, but in other words, the bohem is going to be keshitas Rabbi Eliezer. So now ve'idach Rabbi Yechanan. Does it mean that Rabbi Yechanan cannot accept Rabbi Eliezer? No. So the Gemara says, the first white line, no, he learns the same din that the Torah not only wrote the words mumbam, but mashchasam bohem. And the word bohem could have been written without a hey. The Torah could have written ki mashchasam bam mumbam. We would have learned everything. The hey is nacha extra letter. Mibam bahem. And the idach, which is rav, bam bahem loidarish. Okay, Gavaldik. Now says the Gemara, that's taka the source. No, it's balmum is a source where something is nira, vinitcha, and it's re-included. The only question is, do we say that that's unique to a balmum, which is Rabbi Yechanan, and in all other cases, balachayim, kimesh nitcha nitcha, or keshitas rav, that we say balachayim and in the dachim binyanav from balmum. Even according to Rav, zolzain that the balachayim are not nidachim. Still, ulerav nehei nami the balachayim and nidachim. Why didn't the Mishnah paskin? Why wouldn't Rav say that iboya hay nakriv, iboya hay nakriv? So what that balachayim and nidachim? But why is Rav insisting that the one that should be brought should be the original? Why dafka the original? So that now we're chazening what we learned on Daf Samach Beis. So Amar Rava, there's number one, balachayim and nidachim. Number two, Rav Savar ki Rabbi Yosi. Vazakt Rabbi Yosi, the Amar mitzvah b'rishoyna. Hi Rabbi Yosi, where do we find that opinion? Mamash, a great chazara in Nema Rabbi Yosi that we find in Shkolim. When it comes to the kupais, to the baskets from the Trumas Halishka, Tnan we learned in the Mishnah. Here we don't have Rabbi Yosi. And Taka, the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yosi, the Braisa quotes Rabbi Yosi's nuance. The Mishnah says, Shalish kupais, 3 baskets. Each basket was large enough to hold the quantity of the volume of 3 sa'ah. Every time, and there were 3 times that we took out money from the lishka. Every time we took it out, it wasn't taking it out in 1 basket, we took out in 3 baskets. And on the 3 baskets that were removed, the kosov aleyan aleph beis gimel. And on that, Vatanya Amar Rabbi Yosi, Lama Kosav Aleim Aleph Beis Gimel. Who cares? You're going to use all the money. Lamay nafkamina, which basket is 1, 2, or 3? And the answer is Leida Eizamehem Nitana Rishain. To know which one was removed first, meaning that when the Kohen took out the baskets, he didn't chop all 3 baskets and walk out. He went in there, he took out basket number 1. He went back and in there, took out basket number 2. And the one that he took out 1 was Aleph, and the second base in the 3rd gimel. Why? But why did we need to know that? Lahavi haimenu rishain. Because now that he's out of the lishka of the shkolim, now that these baskets are now in their new home, more accessible, you're taking money mamish from that for the karbanei sibur, you have to first empty basket 1. And then basket number 2. Why? The words of Rabbi Yosi. Shemitzvah barishain. So l'cha'ira, that's the source where we see from Rabbi Yosi mitzvah barishain, and therefore Rav coming back over here, since balichaim einam nidachim, you have 2 seirim lashem mitzvah barishain. So when the Mishnah says v'hasheni, it means sheni from the zuk sheni should be the one that's yirim. Says the Gemara, that cannot be the source. Why? Because dil mashani Hassan, when you took out basket number 1. Basket number 2 wasn't taken out yet. So there was a moment where you only had that basket Aleph to be used. The basket 2 is a newcomer. There was a moment where you had one without the other. Maybe over there, since the beidna dis chazoi kamaisa, when you had the first basket that was taka usable, lo yischazi basraisa, later basket number 2, later basket number 3 comes out. Maybe only over there, says Rabbi Yossi, mitzvah b'rishoina. Masha'enkin over here, this is important. Even though, Chevra, that Seir Lashem had a moment where it was not fit. Emes. But you know something? No Seirim were ever fit, even if the Mishtalech would not have died. You know when you begin doing the avoid of the soil, guys, let's go back. You only do it after, you only shech the soil after the dam of the pot was sprinkled inside the Kodesh Kachim. Before you came to that point in the avoid, and that's even according, whether you go like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rabbi Nechemiah, Lakula Alma, the avoida, the big day lovin, bifnim means lefnai velefnim, the seder is ma'akev. So that means you wouldn't even shecht it. You wouldn't even shecht it until you finish doing the avodas apar, the first sprinkling in the Holy of Holies. So none of them were fit. So let's go back to the case of the Mishnah. So you, whether you began to do the avoid of the pot or whether you just made the goydel, and then one of them, the Azazel died. The Azazel died. So you got pair number 2. You can't say that there was a Lashem, even according to Rav, that says that Balanachayim can be re-included. So what if it was re-included? You're not up to that step in the avodah. After he finishes the avodah of the par, at that moment you have 2 seirim. Why are you calling the first pair Rishon? It was never fit. It's not like the case of the baskets. Ella, therefore, to find a more similar case, which works, is Rabbi Yossi, that we find his opinion by our Korban Pesach. And here again, it's the Tanya, it's a Braisa. The Braisa says, Hamafresh Pischoi V'avad. And like we spoke out to Rashi and Daf Samach Beis, the Braisa doesn't differentiate when this happened, meaning it's also when he lost it before Chatzos of the 14th, before you can bring a Korban Pesach, whether it is in the morning, whether it is on the 13th or on the 12th, I don't care. You have a Korban Pesach, you lost it. And these are people that are medakdek b'mitzvahs. They don't want to have the pressure of needing to find it. First, they were mafresh acher tachtov. But then, varchar kach nimtza harishon. Now, if you found the Rishon in the afternoon of the 14th, then this raya is no better than the raya of the kupais. I know that. But this Braisa is also speaking about the scenario that you found the lost Pesach, the original Pesach, before the Zman HaChiyuv. The 14th in the morning, I don't know, on the 13th, on the 12th, on the 11th, you found the animal. That means that before Chatzos is when the Chiyuv is Chal on me to bring a Korban Pesach. When Chatzos came in, I had 2 animals. Happened to be that I happened to designate one before the other. This is mamish like our case. Mamish like the case of the Seirim. And v'harei shneim oimdim, so the Chachamim hold, and the Chanabi, Eza mehem sheyirtze yakrev, divrei Chachamim. However, Rabbi Yossi Oimer, no, the one that you designated first, mitzvah barishoin, that's mamish like our case. Now, let's just finish the Braisa, Daf Samach Dalad Amid Beis. Mitzvah barishoin is not a value that cannot be outvalued by another value. Now, Bachlal by Karbanos, there's an inyan that the more beautiful animal should be the one brought. So, mitzvah barishin is only if they are taka equally in their quality. But ve'im hoya sheni mufchar mimenu, even according to Rabbi Yossi, the mitzvah barishin is going to be outdone by the value of bringing mina mufchar. And by the way, do you apply the same thing over here? No, according to the Maskana, Rebbe holds Balachai Men Nidachim, Gavaldik. Why Dafka does he say bring the first? Because mitzvah barishin. What happens if the So'ir Sheni is going to be Mufchar? So will Rav say like Rabbi Yossi or not? That's a little Tosfos, that the loaded Tosfos on the top. The first approach of Tosfos is exactly the same. Ubemasnisan nami neimahachim. Even though Rav says the Mishnah means bring the first, that's only if the first and the second are equal. If the second one from the second pair is more mena mufchar, then bring from the second. But then Tosfos says that maybe we differentiate and look inside Tosfos. I want to go weiter. Okay, just to speak out for those that are going to learn the Tosfos, that we also learned on Daf Samach. We learned on Daf Samach Daled. We ended yesterday's shiur. That pushing the soid off the cliff is like shchita, and the question is, to what point do we say that? That's going to be negate to this Tosfos, because if we're going to say that pushing it off the cliff is not mamish like if it's not mamish like a korban, then here lav dafke, are you going to say you want to have the mufchar to push off the lazazel? Rabbi Yossi is speaking about bringing a korban, or mamish, the pushing it off the cliff is taka a korban all the way like a korban. Okay, weiter. Now says the Gemara. Now we have a machlokes. So comes along Rava, and he says, if you will be medayik in our Mishnah, you will conclude that Rabbeinu HaKadosh subscribes to what Rav told us, that Bali Chaim ein in nedachim, and we're going to make a gewaldige diuk. But don't come and say, well, if that's the case, so then Rabbi Yechanan is refuted. Rabbi Yechanan is not refuted because there is a brayso that explicitly writes the way Rabbi Yechanan says. So in other words, really it's a machlokes tanoim, but our Mishnah is not so befedish. That he says like this, Daika masnisin kavasi de Rav. If you'll be medayik, you'll see like Rav. We'll see the diuk in a moment. And for this not to be azat tiyufta and Rabbi Yechanan, but there is a braysa, not dayik. Ubraysa kavasi de Rabbi Yechanan. There's a braysa that clearly writes like Rabbi Yechanan. Balachayim nidachim doesn't say those words, but the braysa in our case, the braysa is always more elaborate. Writes that what you do is you have to bring the soir lashem from the second group. And when the Mishnah says that Sheni Yiru Ache Yistov, it means Sheni Shabarishin. Can never be used because Balachayim Nidachim. Now, how does our Mishnah imply like Rav Masnis and Kavasi de Rav Diktani Im Shel Shem Meis? Not the case that we are focusing on. If the one of Shem died, by the way, in that case, Lashem will be from the second group. Question will be La Azazel. Zeh she'olah olav hagoydel lashem yiskayim tachtov. What does that imply? What does that imply? That only the dead so'ir is replaced. Ve'idach, the one that has to be replaced is replaced. The one that died is replaced, which means the other one that's living should not be replaced. Takadiuk. Zeh she'olah olav hagoyra lashem has to be Yiskayim Tachtov. Yiskayim Tachtov Chevra of the one that died. In other words, we're emphasizing how it has to be replaced. Now, why did the Mishnah have to write that? Of course, the one that died will be the one that's being replaced. There you're only going to have one. That's telling you, in between the lines, that Ve'idach, the one that does not need a replacement, is going to be brought. It was nitcha, is because our Mishnah subscribes to the concept of Balachayim Einam Didachim, because we learned that from the Balmum, and it's not unique to a Balmum. Now, it's a good diuk this. So for this not to refute Rabbi Yechanan, ubraisa befedish kavasa de Rabbi Yechanan, and now we're quoting a braisa. The braisa begins using the same words in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that Sheni Yira Ache Yistov, and the Mishnah left it like that. Now we don't know which one is the Sheni. So the braisa is masbid. Sheni, look, the braisa is noch asking on itself. Sheni Eini Yodeya Im Sheni Shebazug Rishoin, or Im Sheni Shebazug Sheni. Answers the braisa that Kishuhu Oimer, when it says this is Achri Mois in the Avoid of Yom Kippur, Vayikra Yud Tezayin. This is Pasik Yud. What does it say? Va'asoir asher olav hagoyrol la'azazel yo'omatchai lifnei Hashem l'chaper olav, etc. What's the taich yo'omatchai? It shall be stood alive. It shall be stood alive, says the Braisa. Now, don't jump. The Gemara will explain what the Braisa. That's arayeh. V'loi shechaveiroi meis. If the chaveiroi is meis, then this soil lazazel shall not be used lazazel. The first one. Nitcha. Hoil v'nitcha. So first of all, the Braisa clearly writes that once one of the first pair died, the other one will not be used. The other one, therefore, is going to be the one that's Yirache Yistov. Now, how does the Braisa learn it just because it says it shall be stood alive? Check the Gemara, my mashma. Just explaining the Bryce. Answers the Gemara. I'll tell you why. Because Yoma is written in the future tense. In other words, it shall stand for the first time. Stand it for the first time. If there was an animal that stood, Chai la'azazel. But then, L'kula alma, when the Lashem died, it's not standing la'azazel. It needs to have a shidduch. It needs to have a pair. So you're telling me, Rav, that when you make the new goydel, you can reinstate it, then you stood it twice. You didn't stand it once. Stand it one time, for the first time. V'loi shekfar amad, can't stand and restand again. Takaraya, and that's a clear braisa, and that's based on the shita that balachayim nidachin, hoil v'nitchanitch. Okay. Says the Gemara, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, and when we learned the Mishnah, we spoke out the challenge. So we have, in Daf Samach Beis, Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Yehuda said like this, the Mishnah, when the Mishnah said Sheni, whichever one Sheni is, let's move aside for a moment from Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. In the case where the one La'azazel died, so the La'azazel is replaced, you're going to end up therefore having two Lashem. One of them will be used Lashem, and then you're going to have another one, Yiruat Sheyistov. Now the big question is, hold on, both Seirim are called Achatas. Normally the rule is, Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, that if you have a surplus Chatas, it's going to be left to die. So the Mishnah said the words, that She'ein Chatas Tzibur Mesa. The Mishnah explained itself. In other words, we don't apply the Halacha L'Moshe Sinai by a Chatas Tzibur. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Tamus. Clear, Gavaldik. But then we had a V'oid. I just want to read it inside. And when we learned the Mishnah, I know that Rabbi Yehuda gives an example, but L'cha'oira, we didn't need it. It sounds like he's just repeating the same rule of even Chatas Tzibur as Mesa. The Mishnah writes, V'oid Omer Rabbi Yehuda. I'm reading in the Samach Beis. That Nishbach Adam, Yoma Samishtalech. Mesa Mishtaleach, Yishbach Adam. Right? Why? Because it's a chatas atzibur is mesa. Mesa means either the animal is left to die, or if there is a physical, if you have blood, pour the blood out. What is he adding with that? That's what the Gemara wants to understand. Or in the case where mesa mishtaleach, right? Yishbay chadam. Here you have to bring another zug. But what will you do with the remainings of the first zug destroyed? Now the Gemara says like this: Bishloim el Rabbi Yechanan, the Omar Balei Chayim Nidachim, Mishum Hachi Yamus Hamishtaleach. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is going to be arguing with both dinim of the Tanakama. Not only the explicit din that the Tanakama holds that Chatos Tzibur is not Mesa. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, Tamus, because even Chatas Tzibur is included in the Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. But now there's another din, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that the Tanakama holds Balechayim Anidachim. The Tanakama holds, that Balechayim is not Nidachim, the way we were Medayik. Right? Balechayim are not Nidachim. And Rabbi Yehuda says that Balechayim are Nidachim. So he wants to speak out that in the case where you had Nishbach Adam, what is Be'en? The Mishtaleach, and now you're going to replace another Zug. So he says clearly that the one that was designated for the Mishtaleach originally is left to die. For two things. First of all, Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. But which one is going to be left to die? The first one. In other words, Rabbi Yechanan is going to learn that the machloikas between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim and our Mishnah isn't only whether Halacha L'Moshe Sinai you apply that only to a yachad or even to a tzibur. This is their machloikas also, whether you say Balei Chaim Nidachim or not. However, according to Rav holds Balei Chaim even according to the Tan and Nidachim. If Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing with this prat, then Amay Yomas HaMishtaleach. And if the whole point he wants to make, and if he means the second Mishtaleach, he means the second Mishtaleach. So he's not adding anything. If all he wants to say is that we apply the din of the 5 Chatoi Shemesois, Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, even to the Tzibur, he said it in his opening line. Beautiful. Let's read inside the Rashi. We have time. Rashi starts 10 lines from the top of the Amid. Let's read inside the answer. So answers the Gemara Amalach Rav Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda loy ka'amina. Ki ka'amina aliba de Rabbanan. Let's read inside Rashi. Ki ka'amar aliba de Rabbanan means that mi de ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda v'oid, like we said, take is la'ashmo inon, that Rabbi Yehuda holds balachayim nidachim. So the v'oid is to say that the first side of Mishtaleach is put to death. Michlal dishma'inun l'Rabbanan. Fakert be medayik from the v'oid that the Chachamim hold that sheni shebazug rishoin karev, which is the way Rav learns the Mishnah. The balachayim einam nidachim. V'sheni shebazug sheni yira, because the Tanakama holds she'ein chatas sibur mesa. So Rav says, actually, for me it's good, because I agree with you that Rabbi Yehuda holds balachayim nidachim. But Adarabah, that is a raya, the way Rav said, that the Tanakama holds balachayim einam nidachim. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda said his first din, that chatos is going to be mesa, even sibur, and then he says of v'oid. And the v'oid taka means that Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rav, is arguing, and Rabbi Yehuda is saying that hoil v'nitcha nitcha. Rav is saying, when I said balachayim einam nidachim, I didn't say that all of the Tanaim subscribe to it. That's only shitas chachamim. But you know what the problem will be? Now the problem is flipped. According to Rabbi Yechanan, that holds, that even the Tanakama holds, that balachayim nidachim, so the first side, Mishtaleach, is put to death. It's put to death. Now, the Tanakama doesn't say it's put to death for another reason, because the Tanakama holds that by Yatzibur, you have the option of Yiru Ache Yistoavu. So, fakert, according to Rabbi Yechanan, the whole void becomes superfluous. And you know what the answer is? The Gemara says, didn't we just say that if you are medayik in our Mishnah taka follows Rav? Now you chap what we said. It's a brilliant answer. According to Rabbi Yechanan, when he quoted the machloikas between the Tanakam and the Chachamim, he didn't quote a va'oid, because there's nothing new in the va'oid. That our Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he held like Rav, and therefore he understood that not only do the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda argue the way they explicitly argue whether halacha l'Moshe Misinai is only by a yachid, which means by a tzibur you have the option, and therefore you have to yiru ache yistoavu, not left to die. And Rabbi Yehuda argues with that. Fakert, our Mishnah holds that Chachamim hold that balachayim ein nidachim. So first of all, you use the first side of Mishtaleach. You use it. Balachayim ein nidachim. Rabbi Yehuda says, first of all, has to be left to die. Which one has to be left to die? He holds the first one has to be left to die, because Rabbi Yehuda Taka holds, even according to Rav, hoil v'nitcha nitcha. And according to Rabbi Yechanan, he wouldn't have written of oid, because even the Chachamim hold Rabbi Yechanan that balachayim nidachim. The only question is, what do you do with the nidachim? So only right. The Tanakama says, Yiru Ache Yistov, she'ein chatos at Sibur Mesa, and Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, Mesa. So, Amar Rava, Elo Rabbi Yechanan my pligi, the words in the Gemara Fakert, now that you told me that Rav Shita is Taka de Machloikas Tanoim, which is why Rabbi Yehuda has to say, not like the Tanakama, which is what Rav is leaning on. But according to Rabbi Yechanan, why did we need the Va'oid Amar Rabbi Yehuda? So Amar Rava, I just told you on top of the Amid, that Ha'amrin on Daika Masnis and Kavase de Rav. And the Mishnah was not formulated by Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who, if he would have held like Rabbi Yechanan, that everyone holds Balachayim Nidachim, he wouldn't have written the Va'oid. Okay, good. Another rai that our Mishnah is like Rav. It's not a rai that Rav is right. Okay, so now, again, we learned in our Mishnah, and again, this is not just, in other words, when you say the formulation of the Mishnah is like Rav, we're going to have a problem. Our Mishnah writes, She'ein chatos tzibur mesa. Just the first line of Rabbi Yehuda. So again, forget about which one is the sheni. You have one extra one. What do you do with it? Yiru ache yistoavu. Says Rabbi Yehuda, no. That they are all, doesn't matter whether it's the Soir HaMishtaleach or the Soir Lashem, these are karbanos that are in the category of achatos, halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that they're left to die. Whichever one is not used is going to be left to die. Now the problem is, let's be medayik now. When it says, she'ein chatos tzibur mesa, I mean, this is all the Tanakama, but what does that imply? What would they hold? Had this been a yachid, had the yachid, But Yachid ki hai gavna. Now, ki hai gavna would mean, two animals. The owner got kapara from one. We'll see again the details, which one. Then the other one is left to die. You know what? Not pashut. Because we would like to make a contrast of she'ein chatos tzibur mesa in our case, but we're going to find a case of a yachid that's similar to our case. And the problem will be that in a yachid's case similar to our case, to say across the board that mesa only is good, according to Rabbi Yechanan, as we'll speak out. Bishleim el Rabbi Yechanan, kid the Rabbi Abba Amarav, following that which Rav taught us. The Amar, Reb Abba Amarav, we're going to read the Gemara and then we're going to read the Rashi back on Amid Beis, but now Samach on the top. Hakoil Moedim, the Machlokes Rabbi v'Chachamim, we'll speak it out again in Rashi. She'im nischaper b'she'ena avuda mesa, it's going to fit. Kevin, let's read inside the Rashi. Let's read inside the Rashi. All the way in the beginning, Kidra Baba, in the beginning of the wide lines on Samach Dalet. So we had this in Temura. And we have a Machlokes, Rebbe and the Chachamim. We spoke this out on the intro. We're going to read it now inside. Shenechlek on the following case. A person was mafresh chatosai, and v'nevda, v'hifresh acheres tachteha. The new one was not offered yet. Because, my friends, if the new one was offered and then you found the lost one, of course, that's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, it's mesa. What happened here is that you didn't offer anyone yet. V'nimtzeis rishoina, v'harei shteim oimdois, deka'amar Rebbe meschaper be'achas mehem, and no matter which one you will use, always the other one is going to be left to die. On that, the Chachamim say, no, not so quick. Chachamim oimrim, ein chata shekipru be'elea mesa elam, shenimtzeis either la'achru shekipru abba olim, which means you brought the new one, which means you found the lost one. Clear, God says the lost one is left to die. That's always going to be that way. Aval, if you found the lost one before kapara, ula'achar hafrasha, then says the Chachamim that then the animal is not left to die. But not always. On that came along Rav Abba and he says, hold on. Even if you have both animals before you brought either of them, so you have two animals in front of you, let me say it. So then even the Chachamim will be moida, Chevra, that if you brought the second one, which means which one remained, the one that was once lost, even though now it's found, it's still called the chatos that was lost, that's left to die. The Chachamim tell Rebbe, the Chachamim argue with Rebbe only in the following case. You lost your chatos, you found it, you have two animals. If you brought the original one, you brought that, and that was Kedas Kedin, because you can bring either one. Now, which one remained? An animal that never got lost. If what remains is an animal that never got lost, even though halacha l'meisha misine chata she'avda mesa, so what? This animal was not avda. So the Chachamim hold that it's roya acha istoiv, and then you buy with the money oilas nedava. So what's the kasha now? So asks the Gemara that according to Rabbi Yechanan, what does it help up? What does Rabbi Yechanan say? Rabbi Yechanan says that the first one that was unfit, right? Kivin shenitcha nitcha will never be brought. So you always bring from the second zug. You end up with one that once had a problem. So when the Chachamim say in the Mishnah, oh, that one is not left to die because it's a chatas tzibur, it's correct to say that if it would have been a chatas yachid, bein la Rebbe, bein la Chachamim, that one would take a die. The diuk would be correct. But according to Rav, it's Gavaldik. What does Rav say? That which one do you end up bringing? The one that had a problem you bring. The first one, because now it's reinstated. So which one do you remain with? You remain with the second one. How can you be medayik that the second one is not put to death only because it's a chatas sibur? Had the yachid it would be put to death? No. If it would be a yachid, it would not be put to death. It would not be put to death according to the Chachamim. Now, according to Rebbe, it would be put to death because Rebbe does not differentiate. When you had to, no matter which one you brought, the other one is put to death. But according to the Chachamim that argue with Rebbe, and they hold that if you bring the problematic one, the new one is not brought to death. Let's read it now inside. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, that's always going to be the way. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you bring the second one. You remain with the problematic one. But according to Rav, now this is great. According to Rav, let's read inside the top Rashi. The Amar, that Besheni Shebazug Seini Ktani Masnis in the Yira. Rav holds you dafka bring the first one, because even though the first one had a problem, nevertheless, it's reinstated and yischaper. So how can you be medayik hadi yachid Thomas? It's not true. You know what? First of all, according to the Rabbanon, my friends, the loy mesa, as we just explained, right? Because if you remain with the one that was never lost or never had a problem, the yischaper b'dechuya. The Iyunami Amri, the Chachamim say that mafresh la'avid, even though it was designated to replace a problematic one, it's not considered problematic. But now we go further. Even according to Rebbe, even according to Rav, even according to Rebbe, that he says that no matter which one was brought by the Chato Shemesa, right, the remaining one is left to die. Here, loy mesa. Here it should not be left to die. Why not? Because shaharei loy hufrash litashlume avod. In the case of Rav, where one was lost, the new one that you designated was to replace the one that was lost, so it has in it a shame of avod. But over here, here, the first one, Lashem, was never lost. There was never a problem in it. And it's only because there is a psadin that you can only bring one side when it has a shidduch. And because the Meshaleach died, you had to bring another group. And what does it have hold? That Balachai Meinim Nedachim. If you keep in Nedachim, Me'ikare Ibayahai Mikrav. He could have brought, like we learned before, if not for the din of Rishon, you could have brought either one. You know what? Everyone holds that if you have a person that sinned, and lechatchila they were mafresh two chatois, before anything, not he had one and got lost. Why did he have two? It's called, he wants to have an insurance policy. Just in case one gets lost, he has two. Everyone holds that when you bring one, the other one yira acha yistav. So the Gemara is arguing that according to Rav, that the first one is the one that's brought, it's the second one that never had a problem. Not only does it not fit l'chachamim, the chachamim will hold that by a yachid it's brought, even Rebbe will hold that it's brought. Let's read it inside. If you l'chatchila designated two animals, mischaper ba'achas mehen vashniya tira. So the Mishnah doesn't go according to Rav. So counters the Gemara, I disagree with you. It's not like two chatois that were lachatchila designated la'achrayis, because you know what? Over there you could always opt one over the other. They're both equal. But since we learned today on Amud Aleph that Rav holds like Rabbi Yossi, that there is a mitzvah barishain, so therefore the second one is not equal. And you know what? According to the Chachamim, it would not be put to death. But the Rav, who is the one who formulated the Mishnah, Keshitas Rav, understands that the Chachamim from whom you are making the diuk, Mesa, Tzibur Mesa, Hadi Yachid, Tzibur Eina Mesa, Hadi Yachid Mesa is taka only according to Rebbe, not according to the Chachamim. Let's read it inside. Kivan Amar Rav Savalak Rabbi Yosi, Dama Mitzvah Barishain, Mi'ikara Kemafresh Le'ibu Dami. Now one thing is just concluding, and our Mishnah Shitas Rebbe, because according to the Chachamim, who hold that if the problematic chatos is brought, the second one that never had a psul in it, is not left to die, then the Mishnah shouldn't have said that this is a chatos tzibur, which is why it's not left to die. Even if it would be a yachid, it would not left to die. Our Mishnah is Rav, but it follows Shitas Rebbe. Rebbe is the machmer. Rebbe holds that even when the lost one was offered, the remaining one that was never lost is also put to death. Why in our Mishnah is it Yira, according to the Tanach? Because it's a chatos tzibur. Gavaldik, to be continued.